For 31 years, I built homes for other people's families, while my own was quietly being dismantled from the inside. My daughter-in-law smiled at every holiday dinner. She remembered my birthday. She called me Dad before my son even thought to. I thought that meant something. I was wrong. My name is Edward Holtz. I am 63 years old. I spent 4 decades as a licensed electrician in Cincinnati, Ohio, working my way from apprentice to running my own crew, then my own small contracting company. I am not a wealthy man. Never was. But I built something solid. A house on Clearwater Drive that my late wife, Carol, and I paid off together. A retirement account we fed for 30 years with discipline and sacrifice. A workshop in the garage where I still fix things the way my father taught me. With my hands. With patience. With pride. Carol died 18 months ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the last breath I held her through. I am not going to spend a lot of time on that part, because the grief is still a living thing inside my chest, and I don't want to crack it open here. What I will say is this. When she died, she left a piece of paper with our son's name on it, believing that he would take care of me the way we had raised him, to take care of people. She trusted the wrong person. Or rather, she trusted our son, but she didn't account for the woman he married. My son is 41. He is a good man when she isn't in the room. That is not an excuse. It is just the truth as I understand it now. His wife is 38. She works in real estate. She has perfect posture and a laugh that arrives exactly 2 seconds after a joke, like she calculated when it was appropriate to deploy it. Her name doesn't matter to this story. I'll call her what she is, my daughter-in-law. 6 weeks after Carol's funeral, my daughter-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table and slid a manila envelope toward me. She was wearing her work blazer. On a Sunday. I should have noticed that. We've been looking at your situation, she said, folding her hands the way people do when they've rehearsed something. Your finances, the house, the retirement account. I told her I was doing fine. She smiled the way you smile at a child who says something endearing but incorrect. Dad, you're 62 years old. You just lost your partner. You have a house with 3 bedrooms that's too much for one person to maintain. And honestly, the property taxes in this neighborhood are only going up. I asked her what she was suggesting. My son was sitting beside her. He didn't look at me. He looked at the table. She suggested I sell the house, move into their place. The guest room was nice, she said, freshly painted. I could keep my tools in the garage. I told her I would think about it. I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it. I dismissed it, cleared the table, walked him to the door, told my son I'd call him Tuesday. I went to bed that night in the room Carol and I shared for 26 years, and I did not feel afraid. I felt settled. That was my mistake. I won't walk you through every step of how it happened because, even now, I don't fully understand the sequence. What I know is this. Carol had put my son on the power of attorney paperwork when she went into hospice care. At the time, it made sense. I was sleeping at the hospital. I wasn't capable of handling the insurance calls and the bank paperwork. My son stepped in. He was helpful. He was present. He seemed to be doing exactly what a good son does. What I didn't know was that while he was handling things, his wife was reading every document, every account number, every property record. She is in real estate. She understands deeds, titles, liens, transfer clauses. She understands them the way I understand circuit breakers and load capacity. Completely, fluently, and without mercy when there's profit in it. By the time I realized something was wrong, 8 months had passed. I had already signed papers I didn't fully read because they were presented to me in the fog of the weeks after Carol died. Described as estate administration and tax documentation. I had already agreed, verbally, to things I don't remember agreeing to. In conversations my son could now describe differently than I could. The first sign I noticed was the water bill. It came addressed to my daughter-in-law, at my address, for my house. I called my son. He said it was a mistake, something administrative she'd had mail forwarded during the estate process and they'd fix it. I said okay. I believed him. The second sign was a letter from my bank, not a statement. A letter, informing me that the secondary account, the one Carol and I kept separate from checking for the retirement fund, had been accessed and partially liquidated for estate debt settlement. I drove to the bank in person. I sat across from a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. and I asked her to explain what happened. She pulled up the account. She turned the screen toward me and pointed to a transaction dated 6 weeks after Carol's funeral. A transfer of $42,000. Authorized by a signature that was mine, apparently, on a document I had no memory of signing. I sat in that bank chair for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I learned that from my father, who was a Korean War veteran and cried exactly once in my presence when his dog died. But sitting in that bank, staring at $42,000 of Carol's careful saving disappearing into an account I didn't recognize, I felt something happen behind my eyes. Not tears. Something colder. A kind of reckoning. I drove home. I did not call my son. I sat in my workshop and I thought about every conversation I'd had with my daughter-in-law since the funeral. I thought about the way she'd started showing up without calling, the way she'd started reorganizing Carol's kitchen cabinets to help, the way she'd photographed every room in the house on her phone and said she was sending pictures to my son so he could keep an eye on maintenance needs. She was appraising it. She had been appraising it from the day of the funeral. I didn't sleep that night. I made a list. I wrote down every document I could remember signing, every account I'd given him access to, every conversation I could recall. I wrote in the margins of a yellow legal pad with a carpenter's pencil because that's what was in my workshop. And somewhere around 3 a.m, I realized I couldn't fight this alone. I didn't have the vocabulary for what had happened to me. I needed someone who did. I went to a legal aid clinic in Norwood the following Monday. A young woman named the attorney listened to me for 90 minutes without interrupting. She asked to see what documents I had. I gave her the folder I'd brought. She read for a long time. When she finally looked up, her expression was controlled in a way that told me she had seen this before, and it still made her angry. "Mr. Holt," she said, "what you're describing has a name. It's called financial elder abuse. And the person in the best position to have done this is someone with legal access to your accounts during a period of documented vulnerability." I asked her what I could do. She said first I needed to understand a full scope. She asked if I'd been to the county recorder's office to check the property records on my house. I had not. She made a call while I sat there. Then she turned the screen of her computer around to show me. The deed to my house on Clearwater Drive had been transferred 3 months ago. Into a trust I had apparently created according to the paperwork at my own request, a trust in which my son was named the sole managing trustee with authority to lease, refinance, or sell the property. I stared at the screen and I thought about the papers I signed in the weeks after Carol's death, the ones described as tax documentation. I thought about how my daughter-in-law had been in the room for all of those signings, sitting slightly behind my son, not speaking, just present, witnessing. "They're renting it," the attorney said quietly, pulling up a listing. "It's been on the rental market for 6 weeks. They listed it at $2,100 a month. My house. My wife's house. The house where my son learned to ride a bike in the driveway and where Carol planted the roses along the back fence that still bloom every May. Listed. Available. With photographs taken by my daughter-in-law's phone." I did not yell. I did not slam anything. I folded my hands in my lap the way my son had sat across from me at my kitchen table 8 months ago, and I asked the attorney what came next. She told me the first step was documentation, everything I could gather, every bank statement, every letter, every text message. She told me there was a process but a required evidence. She told me to go home, to not confront them yet, to not tip my hand. She said she knew someone who specialized in exactly this kind of case, a litigator who had spent 15 years going after financial exploitation of the elderly. She asked if she could make a call. I said yes. I went home to a house that was no longer legally mine, and I sat in Carol's chair by the window, and I looked at her roses along the back fence. They were still there. Nobody could take those. Not yet. The litigator's name was the attorney's colleague. She called me the following afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. She had already reviewed what her colleague had sent over. Her first words to me were, "This is worse than it looks on paper, Mr. Holt," which means it's also easier to prove. She drove to my house that evening, parked a plain sedan in my driveway. She was in her late 40s, no nonsense. The way people get when they've spent a long time being right in rooms full of people who didn't want to hear it. She sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a recorder, and she told me what she believed had happened, step by step, with the calm precision of someone describing a crime scene rather than a family betrayal. My daughter-in-law had used the power of attorney window, the weeks when I was at the hospital and my son had legitimate authority, to transfer the retirement funds under a fabricated estate debt. The amount matched a supposed tax lien that appeared in the records but had no underlying IRS documentation, meaning it was likely manufactured. The deed transfer had been executed using a notarized signature on a document I may well have signed without understanding its function, at a time when I was sleeping 4 hours a night and surviving on hospital vending machine coffee. It was elegant, in a horrible way. Nothing so crude as forgery, just misdirection. Just exhaustion. Just a grieving 62-year-old man who trusted his family. She set her pen down and looked at me directly. They're probably expecting you to either not figure it out, or to figure it out too late to do anything, or to be too afraid of losing your relationship with your son to fight back. Which of those is closest to accurate? I thought about it honestly. Maybe all three, I said. 4 months ago. She nodded. And now, I want my house back. She opened her folder, and let's start with what we can establish in the next 30 days. What followed was not a dramatic sequence of confrontations and revelations. It was paperwork. Endless, grinding, soul-draining paperwork. Bank records going back 2 years. Notarization logs. Witness statements from the hospital staff who could confirm my condition during the signing period. A forensic document examiner who looked at the signature on the trust formation papers and noted that the pen pressure and letter spacing were inconsistent with my other signatures from the same time period. Not conclusive, she said, but notable. The attorney also found something neither of us had expected. The rental listing for my house on Clearwater Drive had generated 4 months of rental income, deposited not into my son's personal account, but into an LLC, a limited liability company formed 11 months ago, 2 months before Carol died, registered in my daughter-in-law's maiden name. 11 months ago, when Carol was still in treatment and I was still telling myself everything was manageable, she had planned this before Carol was even gone. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with the image of my daughter-in-law sitting at our holiday table, asking Carol how she was feeling, refilling her water glass, driving her to one of her treatments when I had a job I couldn't cancel, and planning, at the same time, how she would absorb what we had built. I am not a man who hates easily, but I came close that week. My son called me on a Thursday, which was unusual. He typically called on Sundays. His voice had that particular careful quality it gets when he is reciting something he prepared. He said he and his wife had been thinking about me, that they were worried, that they'd noticed I seemed confused lately, that I'd missed a few family dinners, that I hadn't been returning calls promptly. I understood what that was. The attorney had warned me, before moving to contest the deed and the account transfers, my daughter-in-law would try to establish a narrative. Cognitive decline. Instability. A father who could no longer be trusted to manage his own affairs, and whose son had only, out of love and responsibility, stepped in to protect him. I let my son talk. I said very little. I said I was fine. I said I was tired. I said I appreciated him thinking of me. Before he hung up, he said his wife had been looking into assisted living options in the area. Wonderful facilities, he said. Nice communities. I might really like it, he said. I said I would think about it. I called the attorney the moment I hung up. She said we needed to move faster than she'd planned. What happened next, I still find difficult to describe in sequence because it happened in layers, each one revealing something beneath it that I hadn't been prepared to see. The attorney filed a motion to invalidate the trust formation on the grounds of undue influence and cognitive impairment at the time of signing. This triggered a court date, which triggered a phone call from my son that lasted 47 minutes and covered every emotional register from concern to anger to something that might have been genuine grief. I still don't know. His wife was not on that call. She was, I suspect, in the next room listening. He told me I was making a mistake, that he had done everything for my benefit, that I didn't understand how hard it had been for him to manage my affairs while he was also grieving his mother, that I was going to destroy the family over a misunderstanding, that his wife had only been trying to help, that if I went through with this, I would be alone. That's what he said, that I would be alone. I let him finish. Then I said quietly, "Your mother worked 30 years to leave me something safe." I would rather be alone than let you explain that away." He hung up. I sat in my workshop for an hour after that. I didn't fix anything. I just sat, because he was right that it was going to hurt, and I wanted to let it hurt before I walked back into the fight. The court date arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in October, the kind of day where the light never quite comes up all the way and everything looks a little like it's waiting for something. I wore the jacket Carol bought me for our anniversary 3 years ago. I wore it because it still smells faintly like her perfume, and I needed that in the room with me. My son was there with his wife and 2 attorneys. She was dressed the way she'd been dressed the day she slid that envelope across my kitchen table. Blazer, professional, prepared. Their argument was what the attorney had predicted, almost word for word. A devoted son who had managed his father's affairs during a period of documented grief and declining function. A trust formed for protection, not profit. Rental income placed temporarily in a managed account until a comprehensive financial plan could be established. Everything done with love, with concern, with the best intentions. The judge was a woman in her 60s. She listened without expression. Then my attorney laid out the timeline. The LLC formed 11 months before Carol died. The rental listing active within 6 weeks of the funeral. The transfer of $42,000 to an account with no documented debt behind it. The signature inconsistencies noted by the forensic examiner, and the hospital records, the nurse's notes, the physician's documentation from the specific days when key documents were signed, establishing that I was on a prescription sedative for acute grief response and sleeping fewer than 4 hours per night. My daughter-in-law's attorney objected to the sedative records as prejudicial. The judge looked at him with the particular tiredness of someone who has heard every objection and found most of them irritating. She overruled him. Then my attorney called a witness. I hadn't known she was going to call. The woman who walked in was 71 years old, small, with white hair and orthopedic shoes. She had been Carol's hospital roommate for 11 days in the final month. She had my phone number because Carol had given it to her, saying, "Call this man if anything happens to me before he gets here." She told the court that during those 11 days, my daughter-in-law had visited the hospital 4 times. Not to see Carol, she said, to sit in the hallway outside the room and make phone calls. Long ones, private ones, stepping away when the nurses passed. She had thought at the time that the woman was dealing with her own stressful work. She had not thought much of it, but she had remembered one thing because it struck her as strange. On the last visit, 2 days before Carol died, she had overheard my daughter-in-law on the phone saying, clearly and without lowering her voice, "The property records are clean. We can move as soon as the estate is open." My daughter-in-law's attorney shot to his feet. The judge raised one hand and he sat back down. The courtroom was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something true has just been said in them. My son was sitting at the table across the aisle. I looked at him. He was looking at his hands. His jaw was tight and his shoulders had dropped, and I recognized it, because I'd seen it once before, when he was 9 years old and I caught him lying about something he'd broken in the garage. He looked like a person who had run out of a story to tell. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt hollow and sad in a way I hadn't expected. Because even then, even in that courtroom with evidence laid out like a crime scene, I did not believe my son had wanted this. I believed he had wanted to please a woman who was very good at making people want to please her. And I believed he had told himself, maybe genuinely, that what they were doing was protection, but the road to here was paved with his choices too. And I was done carrying the weight of excusing them. The judge ruled that afternoon. The trust was invalidated on the grounds of undue influence during a documented period of acute bereavement impairment. The deed to Clearwater Drive was ordered returned to my name. The $42,000 was to be returned within 30 days, with interest. The LLC was referred to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential elder financial abuse charges under Ohio Revised Code, which carries real consequences, including felony prosecution for amounts exceeding $1,000. She also noted, in language that was careful but unmistakable, that the evidence suggested the financial planning had begun prior to my wife's death, and that this timeline warranted serious scrutiny. My daughter-in-law did not cry. I had expected her to cry because she was good at it when it served her. But she sat very still, her perfect posture unchanged, staring at something on the table in front of her. I think she was calculating. That was the thing about her. Even in the moment of losing, she was calculating what came next. My son wouldn't look at me when we walked out. I didn't try to make him. I drove home to Clearwater Drive. I pulled into my driveway and I sat in the truck for a few minutes just looking at the house, the siding I'd repainted 3 summers ago. The porch light Carol picked out because she liked the way it made the front door look warm at night. The corner of the yard where my grandson used to catch fireflies in a mason jar before his parents decided that visits were complicated. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat in Carol's chair and I looked at the back fence where the roses were still there, exactly where she planted them. My son called 2 weeks later, not his wife, him, from his personal cell, which he almost never used for calls, only texts. He didn't apologize, not in so many words, but he called, which took more than I might have given him credit for at another time. He said he didn't know the whole picture. He said she had told him the trust was estate planning. He said he hadn't asked enough questions because it was easier not to. He said that was on him. I let him talk for a while. Then I said, "Your mother trusted you to look after me. That meant asking the questions, even when they were uncomfortable, especially then." He was quiet. I said, "I'm not going anywhere, but you have decisions to make about your own house." He said he knew. We hung up, and I didn't know what would come of it. I still don't, entirely. That part of the story is still being written in the slow, uncertain way that real things get written, when people are trying to figure out who they are after they've been found out. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I live alone in the house Carol and I built a life in. I still work. I still fix things with my hands. I have the retirement account back, minus the attorney's fees, which were considerable, but which I paid without resentment because that woman fought for me like she had something personal at stake. I started a fund, a small one, with what was left after the legal costs settled. Not enough to be remarkable. Enough to matter. I called it the Carol Holt Emergency Legal Fund, and I donated it to the same legal aid clinic where a young attorney listened to me for 90 minutes without checking her phone. Because I walked in there with a yellow legal pad and a carpenter's pencil and a story that sounded, I'm sure, like the kind of thing a confused old man might imagine. And she took it seriously. She took me seriously. She took me seriously. And that made the difference between losing everything and coming home. Here is what I want to say to you, because I believe you're listening for a reason. Nobody tells you that grief makes you vulnerable. Not in the specific way I mean. People say, be kind to yourself. People say, take your time. What they don't say is, watch the paperwork. Watch who was in the room when you signed things. Watch who was asking questions about accounts and properties in the weeks right after a loss, when you can barely remember to eat. Watch who is being helpful in ways that require your signature. I am not a suspicious man by nature. Carol used to say I trusted people the way a good electrician trusts a circuit. I assumed it was sound until the lights went out. The lights went out. And I had to learn, at 63, that love and legality are not the same thing. That a person can sit at your table, call you dad, mourn alongside you, and simultaneously be reading your deed records. That grief is not a period of grace. It is a period of exposure. And not everyone in your orbit will protect you during it. But some will. A young attorney in a legal aid office who called in a favor. A woman in orthopedic shoes who remembered a phone call in a hospital hallway because it didn't sit right. A litigator who took my case and worked it like she'd been wronged personally. The world is full of people who will take from you when you are down. It is also, if you're paying attention, full of people who show up. I had to learn to let the second kind in. I had to learn that asking for help is not the same as admitting defeat. It is, in fact, what a man who loves his family does. Because I didn't fight to get this house back for myself. I fought for it because Carol is buried 15 minutes from this backyard. Because she planted those roses, and she deserves to have someone who loved her living in the house that she left with intention. Because whatever is left of us after we are gone lives in the people who refuse to let it be stolen. I go out to the back fence sometimes in the morning before the day starts. I drink my coffee and I look at those roses. They came back this May, same as always, whether I deserve them or not. I think that's the closest thing to peace I've found since she died. Doing what I said I would, staying in the house, keeping the lights on, not letting anyone take what she left here for me to protect. That's the whole story, at least the part I can tell. I keep thinking about the water bill. That's what started it. Not the $42,000, not the deed transfer, not the LLC formed in my daughter-in-law's maiden name 2 months before Carol even died. The water bill. My name wasn't on it anymore, and something in me went quiet and still, the way a circuit goes quiet right before the breaker trips. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what allows something like this to happen to a person, and I don't think it starts with greed, not really. I think it starts with the assumption that someone won't look closely. That grief makes a man soft enough to walk through. That age makes him easy to redirect. My daughter-in-law read me correctly in one sense. I was exhausted. I was trusting, and I had spent a lifetime believing that the people sitting at my table were there because they loved me. What she miscalculated was what I would do once I understood what I was looking at. There's a version of this story where I never go to that legal aid clinic. Where the shame of admitting that my own son's household had taken from me keeps me quiet. I know that version exists because I almost lived it. Pride is a strange thing. It can protect you, and it can bury you, sometimes in the same week. What got me out of that version was something closer to stubbornness than courage. Carol had worked too hard. I had watched her work too hard. And the idea that someone would sit at her bedside making phone calls about property records while she was still breathing, that idea burned through the shame and left something cleaner behind it. What I learned, and I mean learn the way you learn a thing when it cost you something real, is that integrity isn't just about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when you're 62 years old and grieving and someone is handing you papers and calling it love. It's about whether you ask the question or sign the line. I signed too many lines. I own that. But I also walked into a clinic with a yellow legal pad and a carpenter's pencil, and I told the truth to a stranger who took me seriously. And that decision was the hinge the whole thing turned on. The intelligence required to fight back wasn't legal expertise. I didn't have that. What I had was the discipline to write everything down, to remember sequences, to ask what a document meant before I assumed I understood it. Those are not complicated skills. They are the skills of a man who spent 40 years doing work where the wrong connection burns a house down. Pay attention. Measure twice. Don't assume the circuit is sound just because the lights came on, and the endurance. Because there is no other word for what it takes to sit across from your own son in a courtroom and not look away. That came from something simple. I made Carol a promise the day we bought that house. I told her we were building something that would last. I meant to keep it. The roses came back this May. Same as always. I had my coffee in the yard and I looked at them for a long time. That's what it means to hold a line, not loudly, not with fury, just staying in the house, keeping the lights on, refusing to let someone else's greed write the ending of a life your wife helped you build.